Hello.
Hey Phil.
Hey, Paige. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, doing all right. Thanks for the photo of trad gear placement in a bench.
Did you like that? Two pink tri-cams and a point four.
That made me laugh. That was awesome.
Chris and I found a tree in the park down the street from our house yesterday, and so we did some climber pickoffs and we did some instructor blade rappel setups and anchors. So it's pretty fun.
That's that's awesome. Let's see here. Anybody else on yet? Let's see.
Megan's here and someone named Jay. Oh, that guy.
Or Molly.
Oh,
Megan or
Molly.
Molly. Yeah. Hey, Molly, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep, awesome. Fun. All right. So hey, I'm excited to see other faces than just my two kids and my wife. I thought we'd start again just for review. So we're talking rock climbing protection, but specifically talking about placement. And most of today is going to be on the spring-loaded camming devices. And last week we ended talking about passive gear and active gear other than spring-loaded camming devices. So maybe just one thing, try to get our minds thinking about rock protection. One thing you remember from last week. Molly, I know you weren't there, so you don't have to necessarily comment, but just one thing that you guys remember from last week. And I'm going to try to share my screen here.
I remember that some nuts have a curve to them. So
yeah.
So one way might be better for one crack versus the other.
Yep. Yeah. So right. So with most modern nuts, there's the curve, and you want to be able to read the rock, and then you need to flip it in so it sets in, so it has a better perch. Yeah. Good.
I remember how you can use tri-cams in different ways. You can fit them in smaller pockets and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So tri-cams can fit into things so pin scars is one of those things you climb in in Yosemite Valley or any place especially granite. They would hammer in a lot of pitons, and those pin scars open up, and sometimes they're a place where we can actually place a tri-cam. That's good. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so you guys seeing the screen now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. What else do people remember? Hey, Marika. Paige, you remember anything?
Yeah, I remember I didn't remember that you could place hexes actively because I don't have any, and so I don't ever place them. And when I do place them, I always place them passively, but I forgot that you can also place them actively.
Right.
So thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
I also learned that you don't place passive tri-cams very often, which surprises me.
I don't place passive tri-cams very often.
Oh, and I did yesterday too. I placed a passive cam. I've never done that before. I mean, it was in a park bench, but
yeah. I very rarely have I placed a passive cam. The only place I really have done it is if I can slot the wire of the cam down through a hole, so the cam comes into basically a hole in the rock, and then it's being held there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the problem is that when it's placed passively, it just doesn't get set. Yeah, it doesn't get set into the rock, so then it just moves around.
I mean, I've placed nuts like that before, but I've never placed a cam like that before.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so Molly and Marika, you guys are joining us kind of midstream in this lesson, but it's some of the fun stuff. We're going to move into spring-loaded camming devices, but I want to talk about this tri-cam placement a little bit more. We chatted about it and didn't totally like it. And I realized kind of later that the thing I really hate about this is that the fulcrum is pointed up. So this fulcrum point, oops. I think should be in the downward position. Should be down there. So the cam would look like this. I almost always place tri-cams with that fulcrum point in the downward position. It does two things. It wraps the webbing around, and then when the force is pulled, it's the piece has to go all the way up and through the rock before it comes loose. Versus here, the problem is that this fulcrum is potentially able to pull out in an upward direction when the force on the sling comes down. Does that make sense? So I mean, here's a good example. I mean, the fulcrum is down in that one. Also, it protects the webbing. We talked about that last week. So there again, the fulcrum is in the down position. So it's going to have to go down and in through the rock to come out.
I was actually talking to Chris about this yesterday. So if you could go back one slide. You see how the fulcrum is down like you were talking about, and the webbing is like it comes over the rails.
Yes.
So you can place the tri-cam like 180 degrees, like upside down where the fulcrum is pointed up.
Yeah.
And that works as well. But this type of placement where the fulcrum is down and the webbing is wrapped around the rails is better, right?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I haven't read anything on that. It's just been personal experience that again, so the webbing here doesn't wrap into the rails, and the fulcrum comes up into open space versus here the webbing is wrapped into the rails, and then the fulcrum has to go through the mass of the rock. I mean, for that to come out is more difficult. Of course, the rails, in this situation, the rails are going to go up into the rock. And that's the thing that was a little bit questionable about this placement, was that we weren't quite sure if it was deep enough. It seems a little bit shallow. Okay, I just wanted to review the tri-cam placements, get our minds going that direction a little bit. Let's jump into, so spring-loaded camming devices. We almost always just call them cams. And there's lots of different kinds of cams. I want to focus the start of this on just the most basic cam placements, and then we're going to get into a little bit more of the advanced cam placements, and then we'll end the lesson today with how to remove passive gear and how to remove spring-loaded camming devices. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do Wednesday. So let's jump in. So really basically here, you can see that cams are almost always placed in nearly parallel cracks. And then when the force of the fall happens, or the force of an anchor is put on that cam, it goes in this downward direction, causing the outward force. So the white arrow is up here, this outward force. And it is the springs inside the cam. The springs are pushing those lobes out to the rock. That's what holds the cam in place. If those springs weren't there, the cam would just fall out of place. It wouldn't hold. So the springs hold it in place, but the springs don't have anything to do with the holding power of the fall. It's that the lobes want to rotate up and out against the side of the rock that causes the force. So you can see here, these lobes right here are about 90 degrees. That's a pretty ideal angle for those lobes. Ideally, the front two lobes and the back two lobes are at 90 degrees. When I think about placing a cam, if you think about a clock, and this is noon up here, and this is 6 o'clock. So you've got 3 and 9. That cam would be wide open. I'm shooting for this 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, all the way down. The cams can almost, the lobes can almost come all the way closed. And I'm going to show you some pictures of that. But it's basically between 5 and 7 o'clock is what the lobes are, the angle of the lobes. Now, if I overlap the lobes too far, so if these lobes end up like crossing each other too far, the holding power is super awesome, but you can't get the cam out of the rock. So it's not like it's a bad placement. It could be absolutely bomber placement. If you're just totally desperate, 20-foot run out, and the only thing you have is a number 3 cam, and you think you're gonna die unless you place it, and you're gonna over cam that placement. You're gonna pull the trigger almost all the way so that the cams are overlapping. It's gonna be a very strong placement. It's just that you might not get that number 3 cam back after you've placed it.
Hey, Phil, do you have cams behind you?
Yeah, I do.
Can you grab one out and show us what you mean by over camming and how the lobes are overlapping?
Yep, hold on a second. Okay, so this is number 4. So if I pull down to, that's that between that 5 and 7, and I can take that all the way down to there and still be pretty good because I have a little bit of room to still get it out of the parallel crack. But if I come all the way across, so now the lobes, now my trigger's all the way down, I can't pull it any further. And I put that into a crack, it's very strong. It's gonna hold a fall, but I don't have any space to remove the cam from the crack. So that means it's gonna be a permanent piece of gear. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this as we go forward. The big takeaway from this slide is that the angles of the lobes are 90 degrees or to nearly overlapping. That's what you're looking for.
Another way that I think about it is, Phil, if you go back to that last slide. So do you see on the left side of that cam on the lobe that's like kind of mustard colored? Right underneath the white arrow, there's a tiny little black hole that's in between the 2 bigger holes. Yeah, that thing, that's where one of the wires attaches. When that's actually touching the rock, there's one on both sides, and that's actually touching the rock. These are BD cams though. Some Metolius cams actually have color-coded sides of the lobes where it's like, have you ever seen those, Phil, where there's like, yeah, those, where there's like red, green, and yellow. And so you want the cam to be touching in either the green or the yellow, and the red means it's not, it's undercammed. And then the yellow and the green mean it's good. And the green is going to be best. That's a Metolius cam, right?
Yep.
But with the black diamond cams, they have that one little tiny hole. And that's kind of what I look for the widest it should be.
Yep. So where the wire attaches, what Paige is talking about. So on this Metolius cam, we're still talking about how far we can pull the trigger. The Metolius cams put these red dots, you can see here. And if the cam is touching at those red dots, then the cam's going to be too open. And what will happen is if you fall, so if you think about this, the cam is like this and it's touching the rock down here at the edge, and you fall, it has a chance the cam will actually umbrella. It'll flip upside down. The lobes will flip upside down like an umbrella that's getting blown by the wind. and it'll just come out of the crack. The actual cam will fail. And then, the yellow is okay, but you gotta be cautious. And then Metolus has these green dots here. That's the ideal place that you want to have the lobes touching the rock. And then I just added these red dots because you're gonna have trouble removing the cam if you go that far. Okay, so let's come back here a second. Okay, so really basically, if you haven't handled a cam before, you're just gonna, in a single stem cam like this, you have your trigger, you're just gonna pull the trigger to pull the lobes in. You're gonna place it as the picture shows in the crack, and then you're gonna let the lobes open up, and then you attach a quick draw to that, and then attach your rope to that quick draw.
So Phil, have you read about BD's new cams where they come pre-triggered?
I have, and I'm going to show that at the end. This guy's called the advanced spring-loaded camming devices. So near the end, we're going to talk about some of the new technology that's happening. It's pretty fun. It's pretty cool. But let's just start with making sure we all understand this placement thing. So you can see on the left-hand side here, that cam is placed perfectly. And then you can see, sorry, the middle one, it's over cam, but again, if I'm absolutely desperate, life and death, it's gonna hold me. And then the far right one, it's under cammed. And so there's a chance that it's gonna umbrella, it's not gonna hold you. Any questions about that before I move forward here? Okay, so moving on here a little bit, just thinking about somehow like how we place it. So this is a 4-lobe cam, and it's in a shallow crack. So ideally, we're gonna put the 4 lobes in that direction because this is problematic. Rock could break, or that lobe just comes off. If one lobe comes out of a flaring crack or a shallow crack, then the problem is that the rest of them will tend to walk out. When we're talking about a cam that's walking, it just simply means that some of the lobes are pulled further and some of the lobes are pulled less, and so then the cam tends to move and wobble out. That's what we call walking out of a crack. So on this right one, if this lobe right here broke the rock or start to walk out, then the rest of the cam would walk out, and then the cam wouldn't hold a fall. So we typically don't think about, well, okay, let me start with the reason cams were originally invented was to protect parallel cracks. But they do work in non-parallel cracks to some extent, but we have to be very careful. So the one on the left gives me that really good feeling when I place it, and the cam is going into like a cupped area. And that feels really good because I know it's not going to walk. And most importantly, there's tons of surface area. Each lobe is touching the rock a lot. Now the second one, it doesn't feel quite as good to me. The benefit of it is that the downward pull has that constrictive crack there. The downside is that if it wobbles up, then the lobes are going to open up, and then I'm getting in a situation where it could umbrella. So I have to be very careful with a constricting crack with a spring-loaded camming device. So this is where the hexes really shine for me. I can have 2 or 3 hexes on my rack, and if I have a constricted crack, I can place that hex so you can see, I think you can see, it's tapered a little bit. So I can place that hex into that constricting crack. So you can see the size. That this hex almost is a size 4. It's probably more like a 3.5. It's very lightweight. They're fairly inexpensive. And so they'll fit into a situation where the cam is not going to work very well. So the cam on the left here is going to tend to walk up and open up. And a hex can be placed and yanked down so that it holds in place. And we jumped ahead and talked about this one a little bit. So I don't think there's anything really more to say about this. I like this cam placement. Now, it's hard to tell in the picture. This spot right there, it might not have a ton of surface area, but what I like about it is that the rock here is cupped. And the rock quality looks really good. Looks really solid. It's easy to get your fingers to the trigger, so it's going to be easy for the follower to be able to take that cam out. And then the lobes are in that kind of ideal 90 degrees. So that's a kind of an ideal cam placement. This one's a poor one. You can see it's on the red dots. It's very open. Be very, very scary to climb on top of this. This is a very poor placement. I mean, probably could hold body weight, but man, if you took a fall on this, most likely just pop out. The lobes would invert enough that it would just come loose. So here's a tight cam placement. It's a little hard to see. You can see though the lobes are overlapping there. This is a very strong placement. It's going to hold a fall. The downside is it could be difficult to get the cam out of the rock because 2 things. One is that it's nearly over cammed, and it looks like to me it's going to be a little bit hard to get your fingers to the trigger. And I'm going to talk about how we could possibly get that out when we talk about removing gear. I like this placement. It's very solid. I've done hundreds of placements that are like this. The follower is going to have a little bit of trouble. They're going to scrape up their knuckles getting this one out, but there's enough room that they can pull the trigger a little bit and still remove the cam. So as you start placing trad gear, whatever type of trad gear you're using, you start to get a feel for the size. And the reason that's important is that you want to choose the cam that's going to fit the first time. So like, you know, if you have Camelots, and this one's correct for me, it's about a hand size, a number 2 will fit. The number 2 cam will fit into that crack. So I can put my hand in the crack, and then I can go to my rack, pull the number 2 cam off, place it, clip the alpine draw to it, clip the rope to it, and keep moving. So try to make that as efficient as possible. So the takeaway from this slide is as you or when you start trad climbing, or even when you're practicing down on the ground, you can feel the crack with your hand, your fingers, your fist, to try to get a feel for the size and then choose the right cam. Just looking at some more cam placements. You can see the left one. more wide open, chance of to umbrella. So these are all, it's all in the same crack. This is just 3 different size cams. The far right one, again, it's way over cammed. It'd be very difficult to get that one out. They're all facing the direction of force. I haven't talked about that much, but so the stem is going to be in the direction of force. So the fall is going to be down in this case. Now you will see, and I'll do this, where the cam is placed into the crack, and the stem will be a little bit on an angle, even though the fall is going to be straight down. And the reason for that is that the rock is accepting the cam in a certain orientation, and I think that the fall is going to rotate a little bit, but it's going to be in a good spot and hold. It's very rare that I have the cam straight down in the direction of force. The stem of the cam tends to be on a little bit of an angle in the downward direction, but rarely is it exactly like these pictures are showing here. Part of that is also rope drag. So if the stem sticks out a little bit on an angle, then the rope's going to pull through the crack a little easier. Here's just another example of a cam placement. It's number 6. So it's a very large cam. You can see here the stem direction, it looks more in this picture to be coming outward and a little down. So maybe we just go around the horn. What things do you like about this placement? Just kind of make this a little bit more interactive. I mean, I love hearing myself talk, but.
The lobes are at 90 degrees.
Yeah, okay, good. So
Roughly 90.
lobes are 90. Nice. What else do you see?
The rock looks pretty solid, so it looks like it's gonna hold if you take a fall. It'll
Yes.
put a lot of pressure and like force.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree with that. It just looks like really good rock, really clean rock. I'd say that. Does somebody else have one?
Oh, it said the placement looks pretty deep.
Yeah, deep, right? So the advantage of that is that you have a little bit more margin for error. So if it's right on the edge of the rock, then there's a chance the rock breaks. Here it's deep, and it's a very big cam, so your hand can get to the trigger. So that's totally fine in this situation. Nice, I like that.
I would say like the where it's touching the wall is like
Yeah.
right in the green spot.
Yes, good. Yep, that's perfect. Green spot there, and I mean, like right here, looks like to me just nice surface area. Lots
Yeah.
of surface area touching there. Yeah, and you have a little bit of a bulge right there. It's kind of holding it in place. I think the only downside on this is that it looks like it's sticking. So do I have this? It looks like the stem is sticking almost straight out parallel to the fall versus like if it was downward a little bit more. So if a person actually fell on this, it would twist the cam. It's probably totally fine. This size cam and this placement and the rock quality is all so good. It's not going to really matter. But I might angle the stem downward just a little more. Okay, so hey, before I go, I'm going to look at some specialized cam spring-loaded devices. Any questions about cams? Okay. So I don't know if I'd fit the Big Bro exactly into spring-loaded camming devices, but they do have springs. Have you guys seen Big Bros before? Paige has, nobody else. Yeah. So Big Bros, you can see she's placing it here, and I'm gonna switch to a little video because it's a little more fun. But I gotta switch my screen here. So let me see if I can.
Pamela Pack.
Yes,
She's pretty awesome.
she's pretty awesome, and this video is pretty fun.
I climb with her ex-boyfriend.
Nice. Okay, so I am trying to find. Oh, here we go. Okay, oops.
She's very tiny.
I am. Oops. I'm somehow I'm not being able to find my share screen. Sorry about this, guys.
Hit escape on your computer and see if that helps.
I'm in the Zoom. Yeah. Shoot. So I'm sharing off an iPad, and then when I go to Zoom, it doesn't give me. How do I come out of that?
Try to hit escape on your computer. I don't know if that would help.
Yeah, I tried that. Oh, here we go. Stop. Okay, here we go. Got it. Okay, so now let's do this. Okay, here we go. Okay, just kind of fun video about big bros here. It's pretty short. You guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Got volume? No volume?
No.
You usually have to share your audio separately. I think if you go into like the little arrow next to the mute button, and then it's usually in your audio settings. It's like a separate thing than share screen.
Building out. Okay, I'm in the audio. See, building. Oh, see. I wonder if I just did this. If I just take. Let's try this.
I've been climbing offwidths for about
Volume?
8 years now.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
My main mentor as an offwidth climber has been Craig Lubin, and Craig invented the Big Bro for his PhD project in mechanical engineering, and we still use Big Bros today. In fact, I use them quite extensively, and for good reason. They're some of the best offwidth pro available. A lot of the desert adventure climbs established by the pioneers are long, scary, very difficult to protect routes. We have some modern gear that makes them a little bit safer, but there's still a huge range that's not covered by modern gear. The Big Bro is really the only pro that can protect that style of climb, because many of them are massive run-out chimneys, like Hypercrack on the anchor chain has an 80-foot run-out, so it's a 511X pitch, and unprotectable without a gold Big Bro, which is the largest of the Big Bros. I had climbed a Hypercrack before without the gold Bro, and you have no option to fall. It's just horrifying. But with the gold Bro, you actually feel a little bit safer on it. So it does make it possible to climb routes that we wouldn't be able to climb safely at all. The gold Big Bro hasn't been available for years, and it's really one of the best pieces of Off-Width Pro, the only Off-Width Pro to protect wide chimneys. So Triangle will be doing a limited run of the gold Bro, and I'm really excited. I can't wait to actually have my own collection of them. They'll be available briefly, and then they'll be gone again.
Okay. So super fun, super obscure. I think I've only used Big Bros a couple times. It's like a green one I used, but the gold one is the biggest one. Any takeaways from the video? Thoughts? What did you guys notice? Like, not even about the gear, even, but maybe even just like about the whole route and stuff. Anything jump out at you?
I just thought it was cool that this was like a PhD project that someone made. They're like, yep, I want to be able to climb these like this route, and so I'm gonna like make something so I can do that. I think
Yeah.
that's really rad.
I thought that was pretty cool too.
To me, it looks a little awkward to place.
Oh, yeah. Totally awkward. I mean, you have to twist it and like turn it. You know, have to have a way to get both hands on the big bro. Yeah.
She made that 511X off with look pretty casual, didn't she?
Oh my gosh. And then she's like, she did it without the big bro. I was like, what? 80 feet of off width like that with no protection? I mean, oh, I'd be absolutely terrifying because one of the things, and we'll talk about this when we get into the psychology of confident and courageous climbing, is the flow state. And one of the problems with off widths for me is that I can never get into a flow state. I'm always constantly making the move and then stopping and looking down. And, you know, once I would get, 10 feet above my last piece, I'd be like shitting my pants. So,
She's probably one of the best off-width climbers in the world, Pamela Pack.
yeah, it's pretty cool. See her moving.
514 off-width. Could you imagine?
I really liked, the chicken wing. So when she's putting her elbow on one side of the rock and then her hand on the other and her hand is down, that's a pretty cool move. We can practice that one when we get back together. There's some off-widths in Planet Granite, or, ideally get out to Trout Creek or something where we can actually get our bodies inside a crack like that. It's exhausting, but, really fun. Okay, so I'm moving back and forth between sharing screen here again with, there we go. Okay, so there's the big bro. That's a fairly obscure. It's not something you'd buy early unless you just totally love off-width cracks. I'm gonna jump ahead here just a second. So, have you guys seen these? So the big bro, was kind of the only way to protect large off-width cracks. And when Alex Honhold, when I saw this picture, it was on April Fool's Day. I thought it was seriously an April Fool's joke. I mean, this is the number 21 Camelot. So that's massive. Obviously, can replace the big bro. I think they're extraordinary. I think it's like over $1,000, maybe a couple thousand. It's really expensive, these huge ones. So that's insane. The big bro is also pretty expensive. It's about $299. Okay, so here's some other kind of obscure spring-loaded camming devices. So this is an offset spring-loaded camming device. And you can see the blue cams are just a little bit bigger than the gold ones. So this is going to work really well on a flaring crack. So if it's, if you're in a situation where the crack is flaring out, so it's wider towards the outside, you'd put the blue ones in the wider section and the gold ones near in, and hopefully the cam would be less likely to walk.
Are you going to talk about totem cams at all, Phil?
I'm not. Can you talk about totem cams?
So I have a couple of them. They're getting really popular, but they're like offset cams, except for the lobes are the same sizes, but you can set them where only 2 lobes engage and they're still full strength.
Mm.
And they make them in a range. Totem makes them, as the company that makes them. They make them in a range of sizes. I have 2 of them. I haven't been brave enough yet to learn how to place them very well.
Yeah.
But they work really well at places like Smith. I think placing at Smith is one of the hardest places I've ever tried to place gear. I've placed gear in a lot of places, and the rock is just kind of weird there. A lot of times you get these weird, like, flaring cracks that like flare and then they like pinch and then they flare and then they pinch. And so those totem cams work pretty well for that, because you can place them where 2 of the lobes might be like this and the other 2 lobes might be like that, and they're still full strength. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
So they're kind of like offset cams, but not exactly.
Do you have them with you right there? Or?
I'm in my office, so
Yeah.
no, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't keep my rack in my office.
Yeah.
I wish I did. They're
Next-
at home.
yeah,
I can
next-
show. I can
yeah,
show them
next
on
time,
my
yeah.
They're pretty
Okay, so-
cool. They're not that expensive either for what they do.
Yeah.
I know people that climb with full racks of totem cams at Smith.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, so you got offset cams. Pages talk about totem cams. You've got, so this is asymmetric.
That thing looks like a battle axe.
Yeah, and there's some advantages to this. One of them being that it has a little bit wider range. And then this is made by Metolus, and Metolus lobes tend to be wider, so just a little bit more stable. They claim, I haven't used these, but they claim that it has 2 times the range. So I need to play with these a little bit more and see. To me, they look lightweight, and if they really have that kind of range, that's pretty awesome. This particular placement looks like, I feel like I would just come down just a little bit more. Like right there, that little nub seems like that could break. I don't know quite why they're showing this. This is like from the Metolus website, but I would probably place this just a little bit lower. So those are asymmetric cams. See another placement of the asymmetric. So I think part of the reason it has such a wide range is that you can come all the way down, almost, you're really off of the 2 central lobes there. So new technology that's coming out. I mean, Black Diamond keeps coming up with lighter cams. These are 10% lighter. The piece of technology that seemed pretty cool to me was that it has a trigger keeper. So as you can imagine, with the number 4 cam, it's so wide and it gets stuck and caught on stuff, especially when you're doing off-width cracks, but anywhere, any kind of crack, it just gets stuck. So you can pull the cam into that position there so it's more narrow, and then you can lock it into place. And then it's really simple, just one-handed thing that can allow you to release it. Trigger keeper technology. Here's another way to do trigger keeper technology that I've done, is put a little stick in there. So this is a way to keep your cams smaller, especially if you have on a wider crack where you have to carry multiple size 3.5, 4, 5, size 5, instead of going out and spending extra money on the trigger cam technology.
But then you have to take the stick out, right?
You have to, take the, usually I just break it or pull it out with my teeth. Yeah. And then we talked about the link cam when we talked about gear identification. This is just another picture so you can see the link cam, if you guys remember, has two locations. I mean, basically you can pull it through, has a wider range is what I'm trying to say. It has a wider range for placement. A little bit more expensive, but they are a little heavier than a single cam, but they cover a lot wider range. So that's kind of cool. I think Paige's got a couple of those. Okay, so I want to talk about removing gear now. So one of the first things you'll do as a new trad climber is you'll follow people that trad lead. And if you're good at removing gear, you're going to get asked to keep coming along and follow. If you're not good at it, then hopefully the person will be sympathetic and teach you how to do it and get you better at it. But none of us want to lose gear on a route. It does happen. Gear gets stuck. But here's some just principles to think about when you're first starting to follow somebody that's trad leading. So find a good stance. Really look at the placement. Like, was the piece of gear, if it's a passive piece, was it placed from the top and slotted into a constriction? Occasionally we do put passive gear in differently. like maybe it comes in low and then you kind of slot it up high and then bring it in. And of course, that's the direction you have to pull the piece of gear out. So you have to look at it, read the placement. Keep the gear locked to the rope or clipped to the rope as you're pulling it out. You might as well just keep it clipped to the rope, so if it yanks out and you lose control of it, you don't lose the piece. My experience has been most passive gear, you just take the wire and just flick it, just pull it straight up and out, and it comes out pretty easily. But if you have to use a nut tool, you can see in this illustration, you can place the head of the nut tool at the base of the nut. The big thing is that if you hit it, you don't want to be hitting the wires. Those wires can be damaged, and then that nut would have to be replaced. So you want to try to get the head of your nut tool on the edge of the stopper or in between the two wires. And then another trick is that it really hurts the palm of your hand to hit the nut tool. Most nut tools are pretty thin right there. So you can either take a carabiner and like hit it, or if there's a rock or something that's loose there, you can use that to like jam it out. Most spring-loaded camming devices are pretty easy to remove. You just pull the trigger and remove it, but I'm going to show you some tricks there in just a second. So here's just an actual nut, getting the nut tool in there. So if the nut tool doesn't, so you're really hammering on it and you can't get that nut out, I have found sometimes you can climb above and just by changing the angle of how you're pulling it out, that might work. But more likely than not, if I'm having a lot of trouble getting it out, I have to like use a combination of hitting with the nut tool and wiggling the piece until I get it into like a little bit of a opening, and then sliding it out. Usually it's just about perseverance. So removing active non-spring loaded, if you think about this, you just got to reverse the direction of force. So on the left-hand side there, you can see the hex. The direction of force is going to be down like this. I just need to push up on that left side near where the cables are and rotate the cam rotate the hex just a little bit so that it's loose, and then I can wiggle it out. And tri-cams on the right side are notoriously a little bit hard to get out because the thing that we want to hold on to and pull it out, the webbing, is actually causing it to hold tighter. So you want to use the nut tool to, again, reverse the direction of force. So it's actually, you're going to try to pull the nose of the tri-cam up, and then also at the same time you're pulling out. So if you've got a spring-loaded camming device that you can't get your fingers into, so I don't know if you remember early on in the lesson, like there's that one cam that was way in there, it's really thin, it'd be really hard to get your fingers into. You can put your nut tool onto the trigger. You can pull the trigger, but the trick is you're pulling you really have to have two hands. You're pulling the trigger and you're pushing the stem forward into the crack, which is counterintuitive because when you're typically removing a spring-loaded camming device, you don't want it to slide deeper into the crack because that tends to tighten it up. But if you have the trigger held with the nut tool, then you gotta push it in. You gotta push the cam in just a little bit so that the lobes loosen, and then you hopefully can pull the cam out. I have also, it doesn't work very well, try to use multiple nut tools to be able to grab a lobe. So sometimes there's just one lobe that I need to be able to pull and yank, but it's very hard. If you just pull one lobe, the rest of the cam's not moving very well, but it's potential, if you have a stuck cam, you can use a couple nut tools and grab lobes and try to wiggle it out.
I have this theory that if the piece wiggles at all, I can get it out.
Yeah.
If there's any kind of movement, sometimes they're just stuck and there's no movement at all. Those I don't think you're coming out, but if it wiggles at all, you can usually get it out.
Yep. I think that's a good theory. I definitely use the nut tool on the trigger. I mean, a fair amount for removing a cams. I mean, it just happens, especially smaller cams. I just can't get my fingers into it. So obviously, when we want to take gear out, you know, we need a way to get it out, but we also don't want gear to come out when we don't want it to come out. So here's some thoughts on why gear comes out. First of all, just, you know, a poor placement, meaning it's the wrong size nut, the wrong size cam. The cam is too wide open. The nut that you placed in is too big for the constriction. That's probably the number one reason gear comes out. It's just a poor placement, and then poor rock quality. So the things to think about here with poor rock quality, I think we intuitively understand, like if it's crumbly, but like if there's like a big boulder or a flake that we're placing a cam or a wedge behind, and then we fall on that, there's definitely a chance that flake or that boulder is going to move. It's going to open up, and then that piece is going to come out. So we have to really be thoughtful. I spend a lot of time like banging on the rocks before I place behind like a flake or behind what looks like any disjointed piece of rock. So if there's a crack that's in the rock that makes it look like there's a potential for that piece to be separate from the main body of the rock, then I bang on it and I try to hear if it feels hollow. I don't know if you guys have done this with like drywall, like you're banging on drywall and try to find where the stud is, and you can hear the difference in the sound. That's what you're doing when you're banging on rock. I think another reason gear comes out is, especially for beginner or trad climbers, they don't understand the importance of the quick draw or an alpine draw. And so they either clip right to the piece or they have a really short quick draw on it. And then when they go above, the rope is wiggling that piece out. So it can wiggle out a passive piece of gear, like up and out. I've definitely climbed where I'm 10 feet up above a nut, and then I look down and that nut has now come out. It's wiggled out because of the rope. So now I'm 20 feet up above. So I'm going to take a 40-foot fall because that piece has come out. And it's a piece that I think was bomber. Either I didn't set it firm enough, or I didn't have a long enough draw so that the rope ran free. So I want the rope to run free so that piece doesn't wiggle around and kind of shake out. Another thing that's happened to me is try not to do this, but it happens when I drag my toe as I'm climbing. I drag my toe in the rock, or I drag it in the crack, and I actually bump the piece out with my toe. And then now I'm like my body length above that piece, and either I can't get that back in, and I have to like either place another piece in, or realize that I'm climbing without that piece of protection.
I've had that happen with like gear on my harness.
Yeah.
Or like backpack straps or something, just like gets wrapped around it and pulls it out when you're moving up.
Yeah, right, yeah. Something else grabs it other than your toe. Yes, yeah, good point. But yeah, sometimes something gets snagged, and then that pulls that piece of gear out. So you just gotta be careful as you move past the gear. And I know a lot of this is theoretical for you that haven't trad climbed, but we're gonna talk about some stories about how we prevent accidents. But it becomes very real very quickly when, especially those pieces that are low down, like those first two pieces of trad gear, are usually the most important first of all, that first piece is really important because it has to be multi-directional, and we've talked about that before. And then the second piece keeps us from hitting the deck. And by the time we get to the third piece, usually we're a little better off. We're not probably gonna hit the deck. I mean, I think all pieces of protection are important, but those first couple pieces are super critical. And then the other thing that happens, so the final thing here, why gear kind of comes out, and there might be some others, these are just the ones I've been thinking about and what have happened to me personally, is that I placed the cam in a flaring crack, and the two of the lobes, so if, let's see, I don't know how the best way, but if two of the lobes are more narrow and two of the lobes are wide, then that again, it starts to walk. So if it walks out and opens up, then it's going to walk free, and then it's not holding me. So obviously I forgot to put the I meant to put a picture in here, but caterpillars are great climbers. So just kind of concluding trad gear placement. You think about last week, we were talking about reading the route and preparing yourself mentally. For me, the biggest thing I'm looking for is where are my stances going to be, and do I have the right gear to protect myself? If I have those two things, I can climb with a lot more confidence, climb a lot more courageously. Typically with trad gear placement, the simpler is better. So don't overthink it too much. And then another thing to think about early on is taking time just to practice when you're not leading. So that includes following. So, following somebody else is awesome because you get to see their gear, but also as you start to develop a trad rack, or you can use the university's trad racks, is go out to Craig and just practice placing gear. And then ideally you have somebody, at this point, like Jasper, Page, or I, or, there's some other trad climbers that are in the, outdoor pursuits community that could go out with you and like look at that stuff and see how it looks. So whether you're placing gear correctly.
One thing that I've started to do a lot the past couple years, which I think is really helpful, is to weight the pieces that you place. Even like close to the ground, you can place pieces and then weight them to see like how well they'll hold with just your body weight. And that's given me great confidence. Yeah. Because before, like years ago, when I first started trad climbing, I would put pieces in, but I wouldn't trust any of them.
Right.
And then I would get to the top and be like, thank God there's an anchor. But like now that I put the pieces in, I've started to weight them on lead too, just to get more of a feel for like how they would actually catch me. And that's been really helpful for me. It's given me a lot of confidence to be able to fall on them.
And, what we did 20 years ago was we just fell on them. And then that was what we called weighting them. And then it held, you lived, and then you kept going and you kept placing more pieces. But I think Paige's way is a good evolution towards sustaining life.
Well, one of the really cool things about trad climbing is if you're on a route that takes a lot of gear, like you can just aid up it, right? You can just place a piece and then weight it, and then place a piece and then weight it, and then play and get through the crux that way.
Yep.
Right. And then like the more that you are confident in your gear placements, the more things you can climb confidently.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about trad climbing is that you get to place the gear where you want it, and you can just put a piece of gear in and yank on it to get through crux moves, or you can weight it, like Paige is saying, just kind of weight each piece as you go just to experiment with it. But this kind of ties into my point that the thing that I think is so amazing about trad climbing is how you can do really easy routes in very remote places, very beautiful places. You don't have to be doing the like gnarliest, hardest routes. You don't have to be scared out of your wits. You can just place some gear on really moderate routes and have a lot of fun with your friends and just be out in a remote area. And not very many people, I mean, I don't know exactly where the trend is, but typically, trad climbing is like 10% of, it's 10% of the number of people that are like sport climbing outdoors. So also means like a lot of the trad routes are open because people don't trad climb as much. But I think the big takeaway for me is that trad climbing is a way to connect with nature and connect with friends. of course, sport climbing, bouldering, everything is a way to connect with nature and friends. But I think there's a unique thing about trad climbing that brings you together. I think it's because you're much more independent. I mean, you're bringing the gear with you that's going to protect you. Somebody else hasn't put those bolts into the rock before you. So you have this chance to it feels like more like a first ascent, like you're going into a place that's unknown. I really love that part about trad climbing. Okay, so I know we're getting close to the end. We have 7 minutes left. What we're doing Wednesday is I am posting, so Accidents in North America Mountaineering have put out this series on kind of why accidents happen. And since we're talking about protection, about half of this is on sport climbing. So I think it's going to relate more to you guys that are, sport climbing more. And about half of the article is on trad climbing. And I'm just going to put a couple questions in Moodle that I just want you to think about with the article. This is a really light assignment. I think it's like 8 pages of reading, and then I'm going to have you write a response, like 2 or 3 things you learned from the article. And then I've not done the forums before. Have you guys been doing forums at all with this new COVID reality on Moodle? A little bit on Moodle, yeah. So I think it works. As it effective? You guys help me out here. Like, I was going to have you guys just respond to one other person, like in the things they learned. Is that the kind of thing that would work in a forum? I just want you guys to interact a little bit more than, or what has worked with forums? Maybe that's the question that I'm asking here.
I set up forums all the time with my students, and it seems to work really well when you ask them to respond to 1 comment or 2 comments.
Okay, so they make their own comments and then they respond to 1 or 2. Our class is small enough that you just respond to 1 or 2. I think that would work.
Some people used Moodle before the pandemic, Phil.
Yeah, that was not me. So I am learning as I go here. And I said this last time, but totally want to make it as interactive as possible. I realize it's a little bit challenging. I want to make it as experiential as possible. That's my master's degree's in. It's very difficult, but I'm having fun, like thinking about how to do this with you guys. I'm open to feedback. I'm going to post this article because I think one of the most important things for us as rock instructors is to understand why accidents happen. So one of those habits that I've gotten into is reading the Accidents in Mountaineering book because it reminds me that it's like 28% of the accidents happen with really experienced people. So it's not always the beginners. Another one that I just learned, I was reading a different one. It's on lowering. So this is the accident book on lowering. And I thought most accidents actually happen. Well, what do you guys think? Where do you think most accidents happen in a climbing situation, on the ascent or the descent?
Decent.
Yeah, I would agree with the descent because I feel like at that point people are like, oh, we're done with the climb, and so your guard is down, and so people are paying less attention to detail because they're like, oh, it's just a descent. Like, I paid so much attention going all the way up, and then your brain's kind of tired, you're physically tired, and then when you're lowering or whatever, going back down, there's a lot more risk because of just people's like tiredness.
Yeah, that's what I assumed also. Rappelling off the end of the rope, but so I know again it's probably a little hard to see, but it's like 73%. So this is I think historically, since accidents in North American mountaineering have been published, 73% of the accidents are happening in the ascent. I was like, what? So I guess what I'm proposing is that since we can't actually rock climb right now, we study why accidents happen for this kind of next unit. And one way we're going to do that is you guys are going to read this article on protection, like why sport climbing accidents happen, and then make 2 or 3 comments. I'll have it in Moodle set up. Does that sound good? I mean, I'm open, I'm flexible. the other options for me to finish off the semester are, and you guys can text or email me if you like any of these. Is I thought about telling you guys just my trad climbing journey. I think it'd be somewhat fun. It's kind of stories about how I eventually became a trad climber. I still think we could do instructor blade rappel. Molly, do you have access to ropes and stuff still, or? I know, Marika, you don't have as much access, right? But maybe I'll get you something, Marika. I don't know if Molly can hear me. Molly, your mute's on. Yeah.
Sorry, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my own personal rope that I could use, and then we have a bunch of ropes in Mazamas that aren't being used right now for programs that I could go grab a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, I do.
So another option for us is to actually practice like instructor blade rappels at home, tying to table legs and stuff. Another one I really want to do is confident and courageous climbing. I've gone away from like how to deal with fear to thinking about like how do I climb confidently and courageously. I think that could be kind of a fun lesson. I know a lot of us struggle with that when we're looking at lead climbing. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. But for Wednesday, there's going to be this article on why accidents happen with protection that I would just want you guys to comment on. Then we're going to just talk about a little bit more about why accidents happen in rock climbing. So, sound good? I'm excited just to be doing something.
So I went
yeah.
yesterday. I'm getting pretty stir crazy. And so what I did yesterday was I walked around my neighborhood with a friend of mine with like all of my gear, my trad rack. I had like 3 ropes. I had static lines. I had all this stuff. And we were looking for a couple things. We were looking for a place to place gear, which the only thing I found was a picnic bench. But the other thing is we found a bunch of trees in the park down the street from my house. And so what we did was we set up, I don't know if you guys can see this. We set up a climber pick-off, and so we lassoed that limb, and then I ascended to that limb, and then what I did was I set up a wrap 3 pull 2 anchor, and I backed it up with a cordelette, and then we set up like a kind of a top rope thing.
Nice. That's awesome.
And then we picked each other off. So we did the like ascending to the climber, and then we just descended together.
Yeah.
And then there were these 2 big trees, and we just practiced like with all of the gear that we had, just making anchors off Natural Pro. And then we set up an instructor blade rappel. And I did the thing that we did in the Mazama gym where you bring a climber up, you extend the master point with a gree-gree, and you bring the climber up and take them down. And so like even if you just walk around your neighborhood, there's things to do. I had to explain to people that we weren't going to hurt ourselves and not to call the cops or anything, but no one seemed to really mind that much.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like you guys know what you're doing.
We have all the gear.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love it. I mean, I think Jasper said too, like climbing trees, I have a tree in my yard that, you can lasso a rope up there and then like, use a piece of webbing to place around limbs and climb up a tree. And then you can also do that, like some of the top managed stuff. If you have a friend that's in your bubble that you can work with. So that's one of the things I think Paige has got a great advantage. She's got a climbing friend that's in her bubble. So that's super helpful. I'm trying to like twist my kids' arms into becoming like guinea pigs for my raises and lowers, but
I mean,
it hasn't worked so far. So
I was thinking about this. You could probably also just use like a bucket of rocks as a counterweight or something. It doesn't have to be super heavy for a counterweight.
And you're just going through all of the interventions and transitions that we talked about. So you guys kind of solidify that stuff. We'll talk Wednesday about assessment. I do need to do some type of assessment, but hopefully you guys are learning some stuff from these. Zoom is recording these, but they're massive files. So I have a little bit of trouble figuring that out. I'm trying to break them into smaller files. And then,
hey, Phil, upload them to YouTube and then link them so you can create your own channel in YouTube and uplink and upload all your files. And then you can put the links to YouTube on your page.
So I've tried that, but I don't know, maybe it's my internet speed. It's like hours and hours of like
process.
So I'm trying to break them up into smaller units and then share them with you guys. So I'll keep working on that. You guys keep being safe, keep social distancing. It's working. Love you guys.
See ya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Phil.
Yeah. See ya.